The teachers couldn't understand why I, the top scorer in the province, refused to attend the nation's #1 capital university. Instead, I chose South City University, thousands of miles away. It was all because after my brother died, I fell in love with my sister-in-law, but she, fearing society's judgment, coldly rejected me. To make me give up, she announced her fiancé just an hour before I turned 18, and even allowed him to provoke and confront me, taking his side again and again. Eventually, I gave up completely. I changed the university choice she had arranged for me, and decided to start a new life. Yet, when I finally stopped bothering her as she had wanted, she came all the way to my new university, begging me for another chance. Chapter 1. On the final day to submit university applications for the college entrance exam, I sat in front of the computer all day. At the very last second before the deadline, I filled in every choice with South City University and clicked submit. The moment I was done, my homeroom teacher called. She asked, "Jeremy, why did you choose South City University?" "Ms. Mu has been reminding us to make sure you apply to Capital University. Didn't you prefer Capital University yourself?" The Ms. Mu she spoke of so respectfully was my sister-in-law, Elizabeth. Clutching my phone tightly, I responded firmly, "I'm an adult now. I can make my own decisions. Thank you for taking care of me these past 3 years. Teacher, I hope you can keep this between us." Only after hearing her sigh and agree did I hang up. Just then, the TV lit up with a news report about the grand engagement party of Elizabeth and Pablo held a few days ago. Watching Elizabeth in a white dress, eyes filled with love as she held Pablo's arm, I suddenly remembered, this kind of tenderness and closeness once belonged to me alone. When I was 13, my parents and older brother died in a car accident, leaving me an orphan with no one to rely on. While I clutched my parents' portraits, helplessly facing a group of relatives who were all eager to fight over the inheritance but none willing to raise a burden like me, it was my brother's fiancée, Elizabeth, who stepped forward. She drove those relatives away and brought me into the Mu household. She patted my head and said, "Jeremy, from now on, I'll take care of you. You can call me sister-in-law." Since then, I called her that out of respect for her seniority, and she gave me all her affection and care in return. At 14, when my classmates mocked me for being a jinx who lost both parents, Elizabeth came to school to defend me. She told me, "Jeremy, your sister-in-law will always have your back." At 15, while traveling with friends, I was caught in an unexpected earthquake. Upon hearing the news, Elizabeth rushed to the disaster site without hesitation, braved danger, and dug through the rubble with her bare hands once she confirmed my location. When I was finally rescued, her nails were bloodied and broken. Seeing the dark circles under her eyes that day, something in me shifted. That was the moment the seed of love took root in my heart. But because of our relationship, I dared not show it, keeping it buried deep inside. By 16, she had already become the one I saw in my dreams. I knew then, I had fallen in love with the person who had always been by my side. At 17, my diary, filled with my unspoken affection, was discovered. Elizabeth was furious, holding the notebook in hand, scolding me fiercely, but I refused to back down. I said, "You're not really my sister-in-law. We're not related by blood. Why can't I love you?" She looked exhausted, rubbing her temples before finally sighing. "You're still too young. You don't know what love is." Her indirect rejection only spurred me on. To me, it sounded like hope. Eyes red, I said stubbornly, "You're only 7 years older than me. If you think I'm too young now, does that mean once I become an adult, I'll be old enough for you?" From that day forward, I stopped hiding how I felt. I refused to call her sister-in-law anymore. I would only call her by her name. Every Valentine's Day, I confessed my feelings again, even though she rejected me every single time. Still, I never gave up, but she grew colder, started avoiding me. On my 18th birthday, she brought Pablo, her well-matched fiancé, to the party and publicly announced their engagement. That night, I begged her, "Didn't you say you'd wait until I was an adult? I'm only an hour away from turning 18. Just one more hour, please don't get engaged to him." She replied coldly, "I never said I'd wait for you, and no matter how old you are, I will never love you. I'll only ever be your sister-in-law." As soon as she said it, she turned and walked out. I chased after her, only to see Elizabeth in Pablo's arms, kissing him passionately. At that moment, I could feel the sound of my heart shattering echoing from the depths of my soul. I finally understood. Elizabeth would only ever be my sister-in-law. There would never be anything more between us, and it was in that moment that I truly let go of my feelings for her. I would no longer love Elizabeth, and I would no longer stay by her side. Chapter 2. The sound of the door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned around just in time to see Elizabeth coming home. Her expression was as indifferent as always. She didn't say a word when she saw me, but as she walked past, something seemed to cross her mind. She paused for a moment and asked, "Today's the application deadline. Did you submit your choices?" I nodded and replied, yes, sister-in-law. Elizabeth froze for a moment when she heard me call her that. Ever since my feelings were exposed at 16, this was the first time I had called her sister-in-law again. I was very well behaved today. I didn't go up to her when she walked through the door. I just sat properly on the sofa, keeping a polite distance. A strange feeling passed through her. Elizabeth noticed the change in me immediately, but almost instinctively. She thought, this change was a good thing. This was how things were supposed to be. Suppressing the odd emotion in her heart, Elizabeth looked away and said, you failed in Capital University. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Even after everything that had happened between us, even though things could never return to how they were. Capital University had always been the unspoken agreement between us. Capital University was one of the best universities in the country. More importantly, it was in our city. Long ago, Elizabeth had already bought a place near the university, planning for us to move there together once I was accepted. Even now, with a fiancé by her side, that thought hadn't changed. She had never imagined that I would choose to leave. I could hear the certainty in her voice. A flicker of discomfort crossed my face, and after a long silence, I finally lowered my head and replied, yes. Elizabeth wasn't surprised at all. She nodded and headed toward the study. Before leaving, she reminded me, if you need anything before the semester starts, just contact my assistant. He'll take care of it. I said, sister-in-law. Actually, I hesitated. Just as I was about to gather the courage to speak, her phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the name on the screen, and her expression instantly softened. She said gently, Pablo, what's up? Her voice was so tender, so full of warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. I watched her face light up with a shy smile as she walked quickly into her room, completely forgetting whatever I had almost said. After a while, I lowered my head in disappointment, swallowing the words I had wanted to speak. The truth was, I hadn't chosen Capital University. I had applied to South City University, the furthest university from here. The truth was, I was about to leave. Sister-in-law, once I'm gone, I hope you'll be happy forever. I glanced at the time on my phone, 60 days left before the semester began. I opened a countdown app and set a timer for 60 days. Watching the seconds tick down, disappearing one by one, I suddenly smiled. Sister-in-law, in 60 days, you'll finally be free of me. With that, I put away my phone and went back to my room. That night, I didn't sleep well, and I woke up very late. After washing up, I headed downstairs to the dining room, only to be stunned by the sight of Elizabeth sitting at the head of the table, reading a newspaper. Normally, by this time, she would have already finished breakfast and left for work. I had deliberately slept in to avoid her, but unexpectedly, she had waited here. Seeing me finally come downstairs, Elizabeth frowned and said, even if it's the holidays, your schedule shouldn't be all over the place. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and chose a seat far from her. But then she spoke again. My assistant will come by later to take you shopping for school supplies. Again, I just nodded. My silence caught her attention. Elizabeth sensed something was off about me. Just as she was about to speak, I asked first, sister-in-law, why haven't you gone to work today? Are you going on a date with Pablo? At my question, her previously calm expression changed instantly, and her tone grew cold without her realizing it. She said, that's none of your business. Her sudden harshness stunned me, but then I realized she had misunderstood my question. The truth was, I only saw her as my sister-in-law now. That was a simple, casual question, nothing more. Just as I was about to explain, Pablo pushed the door open and walked in. What are you two talking about? He asked. He smiled warmly, like a gentleman. When he heard I was going shopping for school supplies, he immediately volunteered to take me, acting like a caring elder. Elizabeth frowned, seemingly wanting to refuse. I also shook my head, about to say it wasn't necessary, but Pablo had already patted his chest and said confidently, Elizabeth, we're engaged now. That makes me Jeremy's uncle. Let me do my part. Elizabeth gave a small nod in agreement and completely ignored my opinion. She looked at Pablo helplessly and said, all right, then we'll all go together. Chapter 3. Seeing Elizabeth agree without hesitation, I lowered my head, a bitter smile curling at the corners of my mouth. The rejection I had wanted to voice was once again swallowed back. After we finished eating, I followed Elizabeth and Pablo to the mall. We first picked up some stationery, then moved to the clothing section to buy warm winter clothes. Noticing how I kept lingering in the winter wear section, Pablo looked a bit puzzled. Eventually, he couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked, Jeremy, your sister-in-law said you're going to Capital University. It's right here in the city. Summers in the capital are pretty hot, and orientations during summer too. Why are you buying so many winter clothes? My hand froze mid-reach. It's true, the capital gets scorching in the summer, but the school I'm going to isn't in the capital. It's in Pingcheng, far to the north. It's freezing up there all year round, and I chose it precisely because South City University is the farthest from the capital. I replied casually. I still have a lot of summer clothes, so I figured I'd just get all the winter stuff in advance. Saves me trouble later. I kept my tone natural and gave a vague excuse. They didn't think much of it. After we finished shopping, Elizabeth checked the time. It was already noon, so we decided to grab lunch. We headed to a nearby restaurant. Elizabeth ordered a table full of dishes, but once the food arrived, I found myself at a loss. The entire table was full of spicy food, Pablo's favorite, but I've always had a sensitive stomach and can't handle spicy food. Despite that, Pablo kept smiling warmly as he added more and more food into my bowl, even as I just silently picked at the plain rice. Watching the once white rice grains soak red with chili oil, I felt my face stiffen slightly. Seeing me stop eating, Pablo looked a little awkward and turned to Elizabeth. Jeremy doesn't like me. I've been giving him food and he won't eat any of it. Elizabeth glanced at the food in my bowl, her expression darkening. Stop acting childish. Eat your food, she said coldly. Her words held a warning, and I looked at her deeply, remembering how she used to go out of her way to accommodate my tastes. I still remember that one time I ate something too spicy by accident and ended up feverish, throwing up with a bad stomach. She rushed me to the hospital in the middle of the night and stayed up all night at my bedside, only leaving to rest once I had fully recovered. After that, she declared that spicy food would no longer be allowed in the house. There was even a time the maid intentionally ignored that rule. Elizabeth fired the entire staff, saying my health couldn't afford even one mistake. She had truly cared for me all these years, but now, just to please Pablo, she filled the table with spicy dishes and even pressured me to eat them. In the end, I said nothing. I just silently ate the food. The moment the chili oil touched my mouth, I started coughing uncontrollably, eyes tearing up from the spice, but Elizabeth didn't even glance at me. Once she saw I had eaten, she turned her attention completely to Pablo. She served him food, poured him water, wiped the corner of his lips, all with a tender, intimate touch. After the meal, Pablo suggested taking her on the Ferris wheel. Elizabeth was clearly thrilled and immediately got ready to head to the amusement park. Feeling my stomach burning like it was on fire, I waved them off. I said, "Sister-in-law, you two go ahead. I'll skip it." Pablo didn't take my rejection seriously. Instead, he kept pulling at my arm, insisting with a smile, "Come on, don't leave us hanging. How can we go have fun without you?" As he tugged at me, sweat formed on my forehead, my lips were pale, and my voice grew weak. I said, "I'm not feeling well. I just want to rest a bit." "Really? I'll sit this one out." Hearing that, Pablo finally gave up on trying to convince me, but he looked a little conflicted and asked, "Should we drop you off first?" But the Ferris wheel's about to close. Just then, Elizabeth glanced at the time and made the decision. "I'll have the driver come pick him up. Let's go ride the Ferris wheel." Her word was final. She told me to wait there and said she'd call the driver soon. Then she and Pablo walked off toward the amusement park, but I waited at that spot for a long time, and the promised driver never came. As the sky began to darken, I let out a bitter laugh. There weren't many cars in this villa area, and I couldn't catch a ride. Luckily, home was only 3 kilometers away. Clutching my aching stomach, I walked all the way back on foot. The moment I got home, the pain became unbearable. I rushed to the bathroom and threw up violently. After taking some medicine, I leaned against the sink, trying to catch my breath, when my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a message from Pablo, along with a photo. He wrote, "The Ferris wheel was actually great. Too bad you missed it." I scrolled up to look at the photo, and froze. It was a picture of Pablo and Elizabeth kissing on the Ferris wheel, but within seconds, the photo was deleted. Then another message popped up. "Oops, sent the wrong one." "Don't mind it." Staring at the message, I smiled. If this had been the old me, I probably would have felt crushed, but now, I simply replied, "As long as you're both having fun, that's what matters." Chapter 4. For the next few days, Elizabeth didn't return home, but during those days, I kept receiving messages from Pablo. One day he told me he and Elizabeth had gone to a romantic restaurant. The next, he said Elizabeth was off with him to see a sea of flowers and wouldn't be home. Then he claimed she was spending the night at his place. Along with that, he accidentally sent me a photo of Elizabeth in a bathrobe, only to delete it 2 minutes later. At the end, he messaged, "Take care of yourself at home, Jeremy." I didn't bother replying. I was too busy sorting through every single gift Elizabeth had given me over the years. I was also arranging to sell my parents' old house. I deposited all the money into one bank card. Once school started, I'd give it to Elizabeth. That would be my way of repaying her for raising me all these years. After getting rid of all that, I had nothing left to cover my tuition. I started working part-time jobs, early mornings to late nights. Time was tight, and the money I needed wasn't small. So I worked 3 jobs a day, doing whatever hard, dirty, exhausting work I could find. In just a few days, I already looked haggard. That day, while delivering food for one of my gigs, I received an order for a birthday cake. When I arrived at the address on the receipt, I realized it was Pablo's villa. That's when it hit me. It was his birthday today. I hesitated, wondering whether to deliver it or not, but the order was about to expire, and I didn't have a choice. Before going in, I pulled on my delivery cap and mask to avoid being recognized. I knocked on the door. Just as I was about to get Pablo's signature, a foot suddenly stuck out from somewhere and tripped me. I fell hard, along with the cake, which splattered across the floor. The custom cake was completely ruined. A few of Pablo's friends who had come out with him wrinkled their brows and stepped back in disgust. One of them sneered. "How clumsy can you be? You've destroyed a perfectly good cake." I could tell someone had tripped me on purpose, but looking around, I knew none of these people were going to speak up for me. I could only keep apologizing, but the people surrounding me refused to let it go. Someone said, "Do you think 'I'm sorry' is enough? This cake cost 7 figures. Can you afford to pay for that?" The contempt in their voices made my cheeks burn, but they were right. I couldn't afford it, and I didn't want Pablo to recognize me. So I kept bowing and apologizing, trying to keep my head down, but they kept pushing. "Someone like you delivering food, you probably couldn't afford even a tenth of this cake if we sold you," another said. "Forget it. It's Pablo's birthday today. No point wasting the cake. Eat the whole thing, and we'll let it go." Every word they spoke dripped with cruelty. Pablo gave a hesitant smile and tried to play peacemaker. "But the cake's all dirty now. Isn't that a bit much?" The others laughed. "What's the big deal? People like him at the bottom of society probably never even tasted a cake this expensive." "Pablo, you're too kind. This guy ruined your birthday, remember? We're not even making him pay, just giving him a lesson. He should be thanking us." Pablo looked convinced. He nodded. "All right then, eat the cake and clean up the mess." Just as he said that, Elizabeth suddenly walked out and asked, "What's going on?" The sound of her voice froze me in place. I lowered my head even more, terrified of being recognized. Her friends immediately began embellishing the story. Pablo, worried Elizabeth might be disgusted, added quickly, "We're not making him pay, just letting him eat the cake, so he learns to be careful in the future. That's not unreasonable, right?" Elizabeth's gaze landed on me. Her eyes stayed there a moment too long. For a second, I thought, maybe she recognized me, but then her voice rang out, calm and cold. "That's fair." Those 2 words hit me like a slap to the face. I clenched my jaw but didn't look up. With everyone staring at me, I quietly crawled over to the mess of cake. I could hear their mocking laughter echoing around me, but I didn't say a word. I squatted down and forced myself to eat the ruined cake piece by piece. As I ate, a memory came to me. Back in middle school, I once accidentally offended a school bully. He demanded I kneel before him. Instead, I smashed his Lamborghini in a fit of rage and told him to stay away from me. Furious, he gathered a group of guys to block me after school, demanding compensation or that I lick his shoes. Elizabeth was overseas at the time, but when she heard what happened, she took a red-eye flight, traveling for more than 10 hours straight to come back. The moment she saw me, she stood in front of me, glaring coldly at those boys as she tossed them a black card. She said, "Go call your parents. Bring every Lamborghini they own. Let Jeremy smash them all." I may have been an orphan, but under her care, I grew up bright and bold. She always said, "Our Jeremy does whatever he wants. He doesn't need to bow to anyone." But now, she let me eat cake off the ground for another man, and all she had left for me was 2 cold words, "That's fair." After delivering food all day, I dragged my bruised body back home. I was just about to head to my room to rest, but when I turned on the lights, I saw Elizabeth sitting on the living room sofa. The air felt ice cold. I had a bad feeling. I lowered my voice and said, "Sister-in-law." She shot to her feet and snapped, "Why are you delivering food? Didn't I give you money?" So she had recognized me. Then why did she still make me eat that cake, just to make Pablo happy? I kept my head down and didn't respond, but her voice came again, sharper this time. "And another thing, why did you sell the old house and all the gifts I gave you? What are you trying to do, Jeremy? Have you completely lost your mind?" Chapter 5. The moment her words fell, a chill shot through my heart. I hadn't expected Elizabeth to find out so soon. I hesitated for a long moment, then finally came up with an excuse to cover it up. I said, "I just figured I wouldn't use those things anymore. No point in keeping them around. So I sold them." It was a clumsy lie, one Elizabeth clearly didn't buy. She was about to press further when her phone suddenly rang. Glancing at the screen, she saw it was a call from Pablo. As soon as she picked up, an anxious voice came through. "Elizabeth, I just tripped and twisted my ankle. There's no one around." Hearing that, Elizabeth immediately forgot all about questioning me and rushed out the door. Watching her disappear down the hallway, I didn't know whether I should feel disappointed that I now meant so little in her world compared to Pablo, or relieved that she was so preoccupied with him that my plans could proceed unnoticed. The next morning, after I washed up and came downstairs, Assistant Lin was already waiting with a gold card in hand. He said, "Sir, this is from Chairwoman Mu." Before I could refuse, he had already handed the card to me and left the villa, leaving me standing there, staring blankly at the card. In the end, I picked it up, but I didn't put it away. Instead, I placed it beside the bank card I had prepared to return to Elizabeth. I planned to give them both back to her together when the time came. I never used the gold card. I didn't stop working my part-time jobs either. I still hadn't saved enough for tuition, but this time, I kept everything a secret from Elizabeth. Luckily, she was too busy taking care of Pablo to notice. She was out early and back late every day, which gave me plenty of time to do what I needed to do. A week later, one evening, I received a message inviting me to a class reunion. It was our first gathering after graduation. Since we were all going our separate ways soon, and I'd be going far away, I figured I might not get the chance to see them again. So I canceled my shift that night and agreed to go. But just as I stepped out of the villa, I ran into Elizabeth and Pablo returning together. Elizabeth asked, "It's late, where are you going?" Seeing me clearly intending to walk right past her, she frowned. The Mu household had always had a curfew, no going out after 11 p.m. Since she asked, I didn't hide it. "I'm going to a class reunion," I said. Her instinct was to refuse, but Pablo spoke up to smooth things over. "Young people need their own social life," he said. "It's just classmates. What could go wrong? If you're really worried, why don't we go with him?" Elizabeth nodded. "If you really want to go, we'll come with you. A bunch of kids staying out all night doesn't look good." I had no choice but to let them tag along. The moment we walked into the private room, two of my close friends rushed over. "Jeremy, congrats. I heard you got into Hua." I quickly cut them off, asking instead, "What schools did you guys end up at?" They were confused by my interruption, especially as I subtly shook my head at them, but they still went along with it and answered my question. "Our scores weren't as high," one said. "Alicia's staying local, going to a university here in the city. As for me, my parents decided to send me abroad." I tugged them toward the center of the room, glancing back at Elizabeth as I walked. She stood silently, her gaze fixed on me, unreadable. I didn't know if she had heard what they said, and could only hope she hadn't. In the end, Elizabeth didn't say anything. Instead, she stepped into the room and was the first to speak. "Tonight's bill is on me." Instantly, the room burst into surprised chatter. "Jeremy, your sister-in-law is gorgeous and generous. God, please bless me with a sister-in-law like hers." The compliments rolled in one after another. If this had been before, I would have basked in it, like they were praising me instead. I probably would have added, "Of course, my sister-in-law's the best and most beautiful woman in the world." But now, I just smiled faintly, and said nothing at all. Chapter 6. At the reunion. Perhaps it was the striking contrast of beauty and elegance between them, or maybe it was the genuine affection between Elizabeth and Pablo. Either way, they kept drawing everyone's attention, as the two of them acted like no one else was around, openly showing off their affection. The classmates around us couldn't help but look on with envy. Someone said, "Jeremy, your sister-in-law is so sweet to her boyfriend." "I'm jealous." "Right, I want a mature goddess like your sister-in-law too." "I second that." "I third that." Everyone chimed in with laughter and teasing, but something in their words seemed to strike a nerve with Elizabeth. Her expression darkened slightly. She said, "People your age shouldn't be looking for someone like me. You should be dating people your own age." As she spoke, her gaze drifted, almost imperceptibly, toward me. The air froze for a moment. I understood the message behind her eyes, but I said nothing. Instead, I stepped forward to ease the tension. "They're just here to hang out with me, sister-in-law," I said. "Don't worry about them. Let's just enjoy ourselves." On the screen at the front of the room, karaoke lyrics continued to roll. Others, sensing the shift in mood, quickly jumped in. Yeah, let's sing." The first song was one I had picked. I hadn't learned anything new recently, so I chose an old one I knew well. A crush is a one-person thing. I held the mic and sang along quietly. My voice carried a soft melancholy. When the song ended, everyone clapped and praised me. "Jeremy, you sang that so well. You really captured the feeling of bittersweet love." "Hey, speaking of secret crushes, Jeremy, now that we've graduated, you should confess. Who knows when we'll see each other again. If you miss your chance, it'll be a shame." Instinctively, I glanced at Elizabeth, then quickly looked away and shook my head. "I don't have anyone I like," I said. But no one believed me. Instead, it sparked more teasing. "Come on, no way. I saw you sketching someone right after class once. It was a girl." "Yeah, I remember that. You even wrote a love letter." Even my old desk mate joined in. "I saw your textbooks. They were full of someone's name. I tried to sneak a look, but you dodged me so fast." A little drunk and way too hyped, they began egging me on to confess. Someone even grabbed my phone, trying to scroll through my contacts. I held on tightly, protecting it, feeling more and more overwhelmed. That's when Elizabeth suddenly stood up. "I have something to do," she said. "We'll head out first." With that, she and Pablo left without another word. Only after she was gone did I quietly let out a breath of relief. But not in time. One classmate had already found the top contact on my phone and hit call. I quickly snatched the phone back. I was just about to explain, when Elizabeth's voice, cold and low, came through the speaker. "Jeremy, I will never love you." Then came the beep of the call being disconnected. As her words settled into the air, the entire room fell into a deathly silence. Every face was painted with awkwardness and regret. After that night, I never saw Elizabeth Mu again. Not until the evening before the Mu Corporation's anniversary gala. She returned briefly and handed me a box. Her gaze still indifferent. She said, "Try it on, see if you like it." I took the box and returned to my room. Inside was a white formal suit, plain, but safe. Not bad, but not special either. It was nothing like the clothes she used to give me before I turned 16, when she'd carefully select every piece herself. Since then, everything had become neutral, emotionless, like this suit. I changed and came downstairs, walked over to Elizabeth, and gave her a soft smile. "Thank you, sister-in-law, I really like it." Chapter 7. The next day, I put on the white formal suit Elizabeth had picked for me and followed behind her and Pablo into the ballroom for the anniversary gala. Midway through the evening, the host suggested a round of party games as per the schedule. The first game, Guess Who by Touch. After explaining the rules, the host encouraged the crowd to suggest the first volunteer. Since everyone at the company knew Elizabeth was engaged, this was the perfect opportunity for some good-natured teasing. Naturally, they all began chanting for her to guess Pablo. "CEO goes first. CEO goes first." Elizabeth didn't step forward. Instead, she frowned. She didn't enjoy these kinds of noisy games, and she certainly hadn't expected to become the center of attention. She was about to decline when Pablo took her hand and said, "Elizabeth, this actually sounds kind of fun. I want to try too. Come on, do it with me. Let's see if you can recognize me." With Pablo coaxing her like that, Elizabeth finally agreed. Once she was blindfolded, the men were arranged into a line per the host's instructions, each extending one hand. Everyone watched eagerly as Elizabeth began walking forward, blindfolded. The guy on the far end stared at his own hand, tense with anticipation. But Elizabeth didn't stop. She passed by one man after another, without pausing, without reaching out to touch a single one. A wave of disappointed sighs spread through the room. "Ah, I thought I might actually get to hold the CEO's hand." "Same." She didn't even raise her hand. The murmurs were finally interrupted by the host. "Looks like Chairwoman Mu can recognize Pablo just by his scent. She must be very in love to be that confident. So, gentlemen, please don't make a sound, it might give her an unfair advantage." Unbothered by the comments, Elizabeth kept walking steadily forward, but just as the host finished speaking, she suddenly stopped. Standing right in front of her was me, silent, unmoving. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her clear, composed voice rang softly in my ear. "It's you." And then, before I could react, she lifted her face and leaned in to kiss me. The entire room fell silent. Pablo's smile froze, his expression cracking visibly. Startled, I instinctively pushed her away, my grip tightening in panic. "Sister-in-law," I said hurriedly, "you've got the wrong person. Pablo's standing right there." Elizabeth's body tensed. Then she slowly released my hand, turned, and walked toward Pablo's position, taking his hand this time. Pablo gave an awkward smile and said, trying to sound playful, "How could you mistake someone else for me?" Elizabeth took off her blindfold. For a moment, she looked like she didn't know how to explain. Eventually, I spoke up to smooth things over. "Maybe it's because Pablo and I are about the same height," I said, "and we were standing close. It was just a mix-up." Elizabeth looked slightly surprised that I had stepped in to help, but she only gave me a quick glance before turning her attention away again. I didn't stick around either. I quietly found a seat in the corner and watched the rest of the game from a distance. By 4 in the afternoon, the party was winding down. Guests began to leave. Elizabeth eventually brought Pablo over to find me. I was sitting alone, eating cake. She said, "I've still got a few things to handle. The driver will take you two over first." I nodded, offering no argument. I followed them silently, getting into the car behind Pablo, and sat quietly as the two of them exchanged affectionate goodbyes outside. Once the car pulled away and Elizabeth was out of sight, Pablo turned to me with a casual air and asked, "Jeremy, is there someone you like?" Chapter 8. I wasn't sure why he suddenly asked that, and I really didn't feel like answering. But Pablo wasn't letting it go. He said, "Don't be shy, Jeremy. It's totally normal for someone your age to have a crush. Come on, tell me." He stared at me, clearly intending to keep pushing until he got an answer. Left with no choice, I shook my head, but Pablo didn't buy it. His eyes were filled with suspicion. "Really? No one at all?" Want me to introduce you to a girlfriend? No need. I rejected his offer without hesitation. With everything that had happened between us, I saw no reason to let Pablo have any say over my personal life. But in the very next moment, Pablo smirked. Something in his expression shifted, like he'd suddenly become a completely different person. He said, "Are you sure you don't need help? Or is it because you're hiding someone in your heart you don't dare talk about? Jeremy, you've got some nerve developing those kinds of dirty feelings toward your own sister-in-law. I wonder, if your parents could see you now from wherever they are, would they regret having a son like you?" He leaned in, his voice low and venomous. "Don't fool yourself into thinking Elizabeth picked you because she cares about you. You know, sometimes when you hate someone, you remember their scent just as clearly." He was still smiling, but his eyes were full of naked malice. His words cut deep. My face turned pale. I wanted to argue back, to defend myself, but then a sudden screech of brakes tore through the air. The car jolted violently. Both Pablo and I were thrown forward, only to be yanked back by our seatbelts. Furious, Pablo looked up, ready to yell at the driver, only to see a massive out-of-control truck charging straight toward us. The driver jerked the wheel in a panic, trying to swerve, but he turned too sharply, and the car slammed into the guardrail. Bang! The vehicle flipped. Everything went black. When I came to again, everything was red. I was being wheeled on a stretcher into a hospital, the world around me spinning. Through the blur, I thought I saw her, Elizabeth. For the first time ever, her face was full of panic. I heard the doctor speaking to her in a trembling voice. "Chairwoman Moo, we've already called Professor Raphael, the most renowned surgeon, but he can only operate on one person at a time. Who should we save first?" Elizabeth's voice was cold and calm. "What are the risks for the one who has to wait?" The doctor hesitated, then said, "Both patients have been impaled by steel rods. If we delay the surgery, the one who waits could be permanently disabled." Silence. Elizabeth didn't speak for a long time. So long that I began to drift into unconsciousness again. Then I finally heard her answer, "Save Pablo first." And then she followed after Pablo's gurney toward the operating room. Never once looking back, before the darkness took me, a single tear rolled down from the corner of my eye. I dreamed for a long, long time, and in every dream, she was there. Elizabeth. She took care of me for 10 whole years. When I was bullied, she dropped everything to come to my school and defend me, making sure I was never mistreated. When I woke screaming from nightmares, she would rush into my room, hug me close, and whisper over and over again, "Don't be scared, your sister-in-law is here." Once, I got hit while crossing the street. She was the first to run over and hold me. I was so happy that day. "Sister-in-law, how did you get here so fast?" She smiled gently, tapping me on the forehead. "Because Jeremy is the treasure I raised. You're the only one in my eyes. Of course I wouldn't let you get hurt." But now, she was also the one who, when faced with a choice between two lives, abandoned me. Save Pablo. Pablo. Of course, he's the one she cares about now. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally woke up, my eyes were wet with tears. The only person by my bedside was a nurse. Seeing me awake, she smiled brightly. "You're finally up. The other gentleman you came in with woke up a long time ago. You were the only one still unconscious." I shifted my body slightly. It hurt, but I could still feel everything. I let out a sigh of relief. "I'm not disabled?" I asked. I couldn't help but wonder. Didn't she choose to save him instead of me? The nurse's expression turned a little solemn as she nodded. "You were very close. Just a bit deeper and we wouldn't have been able to save your leg. But you pulled through. You're lucky." My eyes burned with sudden emotion. Thank God, I thought. Thank God my leg is still here. Then I remembered something and asked, "Where's Elizabeth?" My voice was still weak, but I forced myself to ask. The nurse didn't hide the truth. In fact, her voice held a trace of admiration. "She's in the room next door with the other gentleman. I heard they're engaged. Such a loving couple. Do you want me to go call her for you?" I paused, then shook my head. "No. That's okay." Chapter 9. During my entire stay at the hospital, Elizabeth never came, not even once, and I didn't ask about her again. It wasn't until the day I was about to be discharged that she finally called. She said, "I've been really busy lately. That's why I haven't had time to visit. I heard you're being discharged today. I'll have my assistant take you home later." I responded with a soft and said nothing more, but Elizabeth didn't hang up. I thought she had something else to say, so I waited. After a short pause, she asked, "How's your recovery?" I replied, "I'm fine. You can focus on taking care of Pablo. Don't worry about me." It was the care I had longed for, just a few words, but now that it had finally come, all I felt was polite detachment. Elizabeth seemed to sense it too. She tried to explain. I wasn't. Before she could finish, I ended the call. 3 days before I was to leave the capital, I had already packed up everything. That's when Elizabeth finally came home. Seeing the bags and suitcases stacked by the door, she couldn't help but ask, "Why are you packing all this?" "I'm starting school in 3 days," I replied. "Just getting everything ready in advance." My voice was calm as I zipped up the last suitcase. There was no hint of anything unusual in my tone, but for some reason, Elizabeth looked unsettled. She asked again, "You need this much stuff just to start school?" "Yeah," I said. "I want to bring it all at once so I won't have to bother again later." I placed the suitcase in the corner, then turned back to look at her. "Sister-in-law, before school starts, could we have one meal together? I want to cook for you." A simple request, but Elizabeth didn't immediately say yes. She paused, then said, "We can have dinner anytime. Your university is in the city, and I'll be moving to the neighborhood near Capital University anyway. There's no rush." I looked at her, a stubborn glint in my eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. Just this once, one last time. She stared at me, and in the end, she gave in. "Do what you want," she said. After that day, I stayed busy tying up loose ends. I didn't have the time to notice what Elizabeth was doing. Then came the day school started. I spent half the day preparing a full table of food. Then I sat at the table and waited, but Elizabeth never came home. As the food slowly cooled, I picked up my phone and tried calling her. Once, twice, 10 times. No answer. Just as I was about to set the phone down, a notification popped up. It was a message from Pablo. His words practically dripped with smugness. "Stop waiting. Check my WeChat moments." Confused, I switched to WeChat and saw the photo Pablo had just posted. In the picture, the Elizabeth who had promised to be home for dinner was sitting beside Pablo, wearing a pale green dress. Behind them were flowers, balloons, and steak. The setting looked like a romantic French restaurant. Anyone who saw the photo would think they were the perfect couple. This was supposed to be our final farewell, and she couldn't even keep that promise. I stared at that WeChat post for a long time. Then, without a word, I gave it a silent thumbs up. After that, I deleted Pablo from my contacts, then Elizabeth, and finally, I deactivated my entire account, one after another. No hesitation. Then I pulled out my SIM card, snapped it in half, and tossed it into the trash. Finally, I took out the 2 cards I had prepared, the bank card I had saved up for years, and the gold card she later gave me. I placed both of them in the most visible spot in the living room. On top, I left a single note. "Sister-in-law, I've given up. I walked 999 steps toward you. I have no regrets. I just hope you don't either." With that, I took one last look at the villa I had lived in for 10 years. Then I rolled my suitcase to the door, called a cab, and headed straight for the airport. I didn't look back. "Elizabeth, from this moment on, I'm going to a new life, one that has nothing to do with you." Chapter 10. Elizabeth returned on the morning of the 3rd day. Even while sitting in the car, she didn't forget to remind Assistant Lynn to bring a gift for Jeremy. She said, "Assistant Lynn, please send the entire set of figures I bought a while ago to the villa." Lynn agreed, and as soon as the call ended, he went to prepare the figurines. At that moment, Elizabeth had just stepped into the villa. As she passed the dining room, her eyes immediately caught sight of the table still full of untouched dishes. She froze for a moment, then instinctively turned her steps toward the dining room. It was midsummer, and the food that had been left out for 2 days and nights had lost all its color, aroma, and appeal. Instead, it gave off a faint foul smell. For some reason, she suddenly felt as though she truly saw Jeremy stubbornly sitting at the table, his head lowered. Aside from occasionally glancing at the time, he didn't make any other moves. But in the end, just like the meal, the person who prepared it had waited in vain for someone who never showed up to enjoy it. A tightness welled up in her throat, but she eventually walked out of the dining room and called the housekeeper to come deal with the table of spoiled food. She said, "Jeremy." She instinctively called his name, but this time, there was no response. She paused, then remembered, he should be at school now. Elizabeth sat on the couch in the living room, massaging her temples, but a casual glance brought her attention to 2 bank cards and a note placed right in the most prominent spot. She picked up the note, and when she read its contents, she froze. "Sis-in-law, I walked 999 steps toward you. Now I'm giving up. I don't regret the past or the present. Hope you don't either." He gave up. What did that mean? For some reason, panic crept into Elizabeth's heart. She took out her phone and dialed that all too familiar number. But in the end, all she heard was a robotic female voice saying the number was currently unavailable. She froze, then quickly opened their chat window to send him a message. She asked, "Where are you?" Time ticked by, and Elizabeth felt like she was suffocating from the silence. She suddenly remembered that a few days ago, she had promised to have dinner with Jeremy, but on the appointed day, she had stayed out with Pablo and never even went home. Was Jeremy just as anxious, waiting for her that day? Her unease grew worse. She kept comforting herself, "As long as I can reach him, I'll apologize and fix everything." But he still didn't reply. It was hard to tell whether the tightness in her chest came more from anxiety or frustration. Seeing no response, she sent another message. Why aren't you replying? But this time, a glaring red exclamation mark appeared next to her message. An indescribable wave of rage surged through Elizabeth's body. She suddenly hurled her phone across the room, her chest heaving as her emotions spiraled out of control. She gritted her teeth and said, "Got some nerve now, huh? Blocking me like this?" Snatching up her keys and retrieving the phone, she stormed out of the villa. Just as she stepped outside, she ran into Assistant Lynn, who was carrying the gift box. Seeing her expression, Lynn hesitated and asked, "President, the figurines?" She snapped, "Take them back." The words came out harsh and full of anger. But just as Lynn turned to leave with the box, she called him back. "Forget it. Give them to me. You can head back now." Her expression was so dark that Lynn dared not ask another question. He handed over the box and quickly left the villa. Only after putting some distance behind him did he finally let out a sigh of relief. Just then, a low-profile yet luxurious Maybach sped past him, nearly scaring his legs out from under him. Meanwhile, Elizabeth raced all the way to the apartment she had bought near the Capital University, storming in to confront Jeremy and demand an explanation. But the moment she entered, she realized there was no trace of anyone ever having lived in that room. Chapter 11. Elizabeth was so furious that she actually laughed. With a cold snort, she said, "You've really grown a pair. Huh? Blocking me, cutting off contact, and now you've even moved out of my apartment. Let's see just how far you think you can run." When Elizabeth arrived at the president's office at Capital University, it was right in the middle of the lunch break. In exchange for donating an entire research building, she gained access to the school's database, hoping to find out which class Jeremy was in and where he was living. But after almost an entire afternoon of searching, the president wiped the sweat from his forehead and finally shook his head at Elizabeth. The president said, "Chairwoman Moo, it's not that I don't want to help you, but we really don't have any record of him in our system." Which can only mean, he trailed off, looking at Elizabeth with a complicated expression. Was she negligent toward her younger relative? It didn't seem that way. She was willing to donate a whole building just to locate this boy named Jeremy. But if she truly cared, why was it that Jeremy clearly hadn't even applied to their university in the first place? Otherwise, even if he hadn't been accepted, there would still be a trace of him in their records. Elizabeth asked sharply, "Mean what?" Her frustration had reached a breaking point, so much effort wasted, all for nothing. Her voice held clear impatience as the president continued to fumble with his words. Seeing this, the president quickly forced a smile and finished his sentence. "It means he didn't apply to our university. He's not a student here." Elizabeth froze. She suddenly remembered the note Jeremy had left behind, the one where he said he was giving up, and also thought back to 2 months ago, when she had asked Jeremy whether he applied to Capital University. She hadn't paid much attention to the flicker of unease in his expression at the time. Now it all made sense. Jeremy had been lying to her from the beginning. What he gave up was his feelings for her. He meant to disappear from her world entirely. Elizabeth slumped into the chair, momentarily speechless. The despair on her face was clear and undeniable. The president of Capital University looked at her, now radiating nothing but despondency, and cautiously asked, "Chairwoman Moo, about the research building you promised, does that still stand?" She rose to her feet, numb and empty. Waving him off, she replied, "Yes, the building. I'll send someone to handle it soon." Walking out of the university gates, Elizabeth felt an unexpected hollowness in her chest. Wasn't applying to Capital University supposed to be part of their agreement? Jeremy had worked so hard, pushing his grades higher and higher, just to get closer to the admission line for Capital University. That way, he could stay in the city, stay close to her. So why had he suddenly changed? Had he truly decided to give up on her? That possibility, one that should have brought her a sense of victory, didn't make her happy at all. She still didn't want to believe it. That the Jeremy who once so stubbornly insisted he liked her, the Jeremy who lit up whenever he talked about staying by her side forever, would just give up so easily. No, Jeremy must be playing a trick on her, trying to lull her into lowering her guard, only to come back later with all his hidden love. Yes, that had to be it. A glimmer of hope reignited in her eyes. As if reminded of something, she pulled out her phone and found another number. Even if Jeremy had secretly changed his university preference, there was one person, someone, who would definitely know where he ended up. She asked, "Jeremy isn't at Capital University. Ms. Lee, do you know which university he finally enrolled in?" Chapter 12. Ms. Lee replied, "Jeremy? He applied to South City University. I thought he had already told you." Her voice carried a note of confusion. Elizabeth paused. South City University. Jeremy had actually chosen a university that far away. She suddenly remembered how she and Pablo had accompanied Jeremy while he was preparing for school, how he lingered so long in the winter clothing section. Now it was clear, he had already made up his mind back then to go to South City University. The thought stirred a wave of irritation in her heart. I told you people to make sure he applied to Capital University. He changed his application and no one thought to inform me, she snapped. Ms. Lee chuckled awkwardly before finally bringing up what Jeremy had told her at the time. She said, Jeremy told me he was legally an adult and wanted to make his own decisions. He asked me not to tell you. I thought you two had just had a falling out, and that once things cooled off, he'd talk to you himself. At those words, Elizabeth suddenly felt a lump in her throat. A falling out. Wasn't that exactly what they were having right now? And yet she still didn't even know what had caused him to vanish without a trace. But now that she knew where Jeremy had gone, Elizabeth didn't want to waste another word on the call. She hung up and immediately called Assistant Lynn. Book me a flight to Penang as soon as possible, Elizabeth instructed. Penang? That far? Lynn sounded surprised when he heard the destination. But President, you have a meeting tomorrow morning. Before he could finish, Elizabeth cut him off impatiently. Reschedule the meeting. Just book the flight. Don't worry about anything else. Yes, ma'am. Not long after the call ended, Elizabeth received her flight details. It was scheduled for just 2 hours later. She didn't linger. She got in the car and headed straight for the airport. By the time her flight landed in Penang, it was already 10 p.m. She didn't wait for the pickup Assistant Lynn had arranged. Instead, she hailed a cab and told the driver to take her to South City University. South City University was far from the airport. Even by car, it would take nearly an hour. When Elizabeth finally arrived, it was already 11 p.m. She glanced at the time and, after a moment of hesitation, decided not to look for Jeremy right away. Instead, she found a hotel near the university to stay for the night. Chapter 13. It was already 11. Even if Elizabeth could find Jeremy right away, he would probably be asleep. It would be more prudent to wait until the morning. That night, Elizabeth tossed and turned in the hotel bed. Unable to sleep, she stared at the ceiling as the hours ticked by, until finally, at 7 a.m., she grabbed some breakfast and headed straight to South City University. Using the same method she had used at Capital University, she found Jeremy's class and dorm information. Then she went directly to the dormitory to wait for him. This was usually when students returned from morning study to eat breakfast or rest. But Jeremy never liked breakfast. Without her around to nag him, he probably wouldn't eat. That's why she made sure to bring breakfast when she came to see him. At this hour, many students were returning to their dorms. Elizabeth, impeccably dressed and standing under the boys' dorm building with a breakfast bag in hand, became a striking sight. Students passing by couldn't help but stare. Even those whose dorms were in other directions detoured just to catch a glimpse. When I returned from the cafeteria and saw the crowd, I had no idea Elizabeth was the center of attention. At first, she was completely obscured by the group, so I planned to head straight upstairs. But my curious roommate insisted we take a look. And that's when I saw her, Elizabeth, the woman I thought I'd never see again. The moment I recognized her, my instinct was to lower my head and leave. But she spotted me first. Seeing me turn to escape, she raised her voice. Jeremy, wait. Elizabeth thought I would stop upon hearing her voice. But as soon as she spoke, I quickened my pace. My roommate, puzzled, glanced between us and hurried to follow me. Left with no choice, Elizabeth shoved through the crowd and came after us. Just as I was about to enter the dorm building, she grabbed my arm. She asked, "Why are you running?" I sighed. I turned to my roommates and told them to go on ahead. Once they were gone, I turned to face her and greeted her quietly. "Sis-in-law." Elizabeth frowned. "You still remember I'm your sister-in-law? You changed your application and ran off to this faraway place. Left me 2 bank cards and a weird note." What? Feeling grown up now? Trying to fly solo? What she didn't expect was for me to nod. Her face darkened instantly. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. Only then did I finally raise my head and meet her gaze. I said, "Ms. Moo, I'm truly grateful for the 5 years you've raised me and for all the tolerance you've shown. No matter what I did, you forgave me. I have nothing to repay you with. So I sold the old house. I also sold all the gifts you gave me and converted everything to cash. It's all in the card I left you. As for the gold card you gave me later, I never used it. That's all I can return to you. I was immature before, and I caused you a lot of trouble, especially after I confessed my feelings. It must have made things worse for you, but I've let go. Don't worry, Ms. Moo. I'm an adult now. I'll take care of myself. I won't be your burden anymore." Every word I spoke was calm and clear, yet to her, it must have hit like a hammer. Her mind felt tangled and chaotic. She clutched my wrist tighter and kept asking, over and over, "What do you mean?" I pulled away gently and said, "Ms. Moo, I think I've made myself clear. What I mean is, from today on, I won't call you sister-in-law anymore. We have no relationship. And the thing you always feared, about me clinging to you, don't worry, it won't happen again. Ms. Moo, I won't like you anymore." With that, I turned to leave without another glance. But she acted as if she hadn't heard a word I just said. She called out again, "Jeremy, I brought you breakfast. I knew you wouldn't eat properly, so I brought it for you." Elizabeth held the takeout bag out in front of me, eyes betraying a hint of both expectation and desperation. I didn't understand what she wanted from me anymore, but after a pause, I shook my head. I said, "No need. MS, moo. I already ate. I gave up that bad habit of skipping breakfast a while ago. You should eat it yourself." And with that, I turned and left, without another word or glance back. I didn't look at Elizabeth's expression, didn't care how she reacted, and didn't concern myself with when she would leave. She's an adult, the youngest CEO in the Moo Corporation, a major figure in the business world. She doesn't need someone like me, an 18-year-old college student, to worry about her. Chapter 14. As soon as I returned to the dorm, my roommates swarmed around me. One of them asked, "Jeremy, who was that downstairs?" I replied, "She's my late brother's fiancé, and also my legal guardian for the past 5 years." I didn't hide it. I stated our relationship plainly, but instead of easing their confusion, my answer only seemed to deepen it. "Then why were you avoiding her?" one of them asked. I forced a faint smile but didn't elaborate. I just gave a short explanation. "Because, from now on, we won't have anything to do with each other." As soon as I said it, the room fell a little awkward. My roommates chuckled sheepishly and apologized one after another, but I shook my head and said, "It's fine. I know you were just concerned." The morning break was short, and I had already wasted a lot of time downstairs. After a quick rest, it was almost 9 a.m. Our first class of the day. We packed up and hurried out of the dorm toward the teaching building. On our way out, Elizabeth was still standing under the dorm building, looking dazed. The crowd around her had mostly dispersed, save for a few guys who had probably arrived later and were trying to strike up a conversation just because she was so attractive. Just as I passed by, one of those guys mustered up the courage to walk over and held out his phone. "Hey beautiful, can I get your contact info?" I didn't stick around to see whether Elizabeth accepted or rejected him. I was too busy getting to class, but from the moment I appeared, Elizabeth's eyes had been fixed on me. The reason she didn't immediately brush off the guy who approached her was because she wanted to see if I'd react. She wanted to see if I really no longer liked her. But as she watched me pass by, without a pause, without even glancing in her direction, Elizabeth realized, with a hollow feeling in her chest, that maybe I truly didn't like her anymore. This was the answer she had waited 2 years for. For this, she had deliberately spent time with other men, flaunted her closeness with Pablo right in front of me, and repeatedly threw cruel words at me, saying she could never like me back. Now, she got what she wanted. So why did her heart feel so heavy? Why wasn't she happy at all? Why did she feel hurt? She couldn't find an answer, nor did she have the energy to entertain the guy still waiting for a response. Without a word, she stood up and walked off campus. Just as she stepped out of the main gates of South City University, her phone suddenly rang. She took it out and glanced at the screen. Pablo. She had ditched Jeremy countless times in the past because of Pablo, but now that Jeremy had truly given up on her, she realized she had no desire to see Pablo again. The ringtone echoed again and again. She didn't answer. She just let it ring, go to voicemail, and ring again, until, finally, the other end gave up and stopped calling. Elizabeth hadn't planned to return so soon, but after just 2 days in Penang, she was summoned back by the Moo family patriarch. Rushing back to the Moo family's old estate, the moment she stepped in, she saw Pablo sitting cheerfully beside the old matriarch, beaming with charm. A faint frown tugged at Elizabeth's brow, but she walked forward and asked, "You called me back in such a hurry. What's going on?" Madame Moo smiled kindly. "Elizabeth, you're not a child anymore. It's time to start thinking seriously about marriage." She gestured for Elizabeth to sit beside her, her tone warm but her words landing like lead. "Pablo is well-mannered, obedient. And you picked him yourself." I looked at the calendar. The 10th of next month is an auspicious day. Let's move forward with the wedding then. All right. Chapter 15. The news that Elizabeth and Pablo would be getting married on the 10th of next month made the trending list by noon the next day. It wasn't until the evening of the third day that I saw her again, Elizabeth, looking exhausted from a long journey. I honestly hadn't wanted to see her again. I couldn't understand why she kept showing up. I had already given her exactly what she wanted: distance, closure, a clean break, and yet she kept lingering. She stood outside the dorm like a statue, silent, unmoving, refusing to leave until she saw the person she was waiting for. The crowd of curious onlookers only grew, until the dorm supervisor, seeing how disruptive it had become, started sending people away. Elizabeth herself had been asked to leave at least 5 times, but as the sky darkened and the students returned to their rooms for the night, Elizabeth, despite the repeated warnings, never moved. Eventually, the dorm supervisor gave up and just let her stand there. 10 p.m. Inside the dorm, Elio peeked out the window, then shuffled over to me and nudged my shoulder. "Hey, your girl's still down there. Aren't you going to go talk to her?" I replied, "Let her wait." I didn't ask her to come. I didn't even lift my head, eyes glued to my laptop screen. browsing through the past events of a few student clubs I was interested in, like I really didn't care who was waiting downstairs. Eventually, I looked up and saw Elio still sitting beside me. I hesitated for a moment, then slid the laptop over to him. We spent the next half hour making a final decision and eventually agreed to join the drama club. By then, it was already 10:40. Elio went off to wash up. I walked over to the window and looked down. Even though it was dark, the streetlights made it clear Elizabeth was still there. That stubborn figure beneath the lamp made me sigh. In the end, I went downstairs. "What are you doing here again?" I asked. My voice, so familiar, made Elizabeth's eyes light up, but the hope in her eyes quickly dimmed again when she heard the coldness in my tone. She asked, "Jeremy, why are we being like this with each other?" Elizabeth didn't understand. Everything had been fine for years. Why had I suddenly chosen to go to a university in the farthest city possible? Why had I suddenly cut off all ties with her? But I didn't understand her confusion either. I said, "I don't think there was ever that much between us to begin with." My words were blunt. After a pause, I added, "You didn't need me around in any other role, but you knew I liked you. And even though I've decided to give up, staying close to you would only make that harder. Isn't that what you always wanted?" I left no room for her to twist my intentions. She opened her mouth but struggled to find anything meaningful to say. After a long silence, she finally offered a weak excuse. She said, "Grandpa and Grandma, they just want a younger person around the house more often." But that made me laugh. I said, "If that's what the elders said, what they actually meant was, they want great-grandchildren." I heard Ms. Moo is getting married. Guess the day isn't far off now. At the mention of her wedding, Elizabeth suddenly remembered the real reason she had come here. She said, "Jeremy, listen to me, I don't want to marry Pablo." Chapter 16. Her sudden words caught me completely off guard. It took me a while to fully grasp what she meant. I lowered my head, and the smile on my face turned even more bitter, almost mocking. I said, "Ms. Moo, if you don't want to get married, you should be telling your fiancé, not me. After all, your wedding was never something I needed to worry about." I had a vague sense of what was going through her mind, but I didn't call her out on it. Our ending was something she had chosen, and once a choice is made, there's no turning back. I didn't love her anymore, and I would never go back to her. I said, "Please go home, Ms. Moo. Your fiancé and your family are still waiting for you in the capital." With that, I turned around and headed back upstairs. Elizabeth chased after me, wanting to explain, but I stopped her. I paused at the stairwell. Without turning back, I still knew exactly what she was trying to do. "This is the men's dormitory, Ms. Moo. Any further, and it's inappropriate." She froze, her steps faltering, but she still didn't give up and asked, "Jeremy, is it really impossible for us to go back to how things were?" I let out a soft sigh. "Which past are you trying to go back to?" I asked. "The one where I still loved you, but you kept pushing me away." I shook my head and continued. That version of the past was exhausting. Forcing down spicy food I couldn't eat, walking kilometers home alone, getting hurt and still being the first one you'd abandon. Every word of mine landed like a blow, hitting her square in the heart. Her eyes filled with pain as she shook her head, whispering over and over, "That's not true, it's not," I said. "Or do you want to go back even further, when you were kind to me, and I drowned in your tenderness, but had to suppress all my feelings, couldn't love you, couldn't ask for anything?" Elizabeth, don't you think that was cruel? Isn't this better now? I listened to you, I let go. I only won't be hurt by you if I stay away. I don't have to force myself to please someone else anymore. I won't be abandoned by you in favor of someone else. I'll fall in love with someone my own age, live a normal life. Isn't that what I deserve? It wasn't until this moment, until I showed her all the screenshots on my phone, the daily taunting messages Pablo had sent me, showing off every little thing he did with her to get under my skin, that Elizabeth finally began to realize just how cruel it had all been to me. She said, "I didn't know. Jeremy, I didn't know he was doing all that. I didn't know it hurt you so much." There was a hint of desperation in her eyes, but I had already let go of my sorrow. Now that I had spoken everything I needed to, I felt a strange calm, relief, even. "No more sadness, no more weight," I said. "Elizabeth, you still don't understand why you came to find me. When you figured out what it is you're actually looking for, then come talk to me." I looked her straight in the eyes, and then I turned and went back upstairs. This time, Elizabeth didn't chase after me, and I didn't look back. By the time I returned to the dorm, it was already 11:30. I had to get up early the next morning, so I quickly washed up, turned off the lights, and lay down in bed. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard Elio's voice. He asked, "Jeremy, are you sad?" He kept his voice low so he wouldn't wake the others. Our beds were close, so I heard him clearly. I hadn't expected Elio to be so perceptive. After a moment of silence, I answered honestly, "A little bit." Chapter 17. Even though I hadn't known Elio for long, after just a few days together, We were already like brothers. I let out a sigh and began telling him everything, leaving out Elizabeth's identity. I said, I used to like someone 4 or 5 years. She was kind to me, but she didn't like me back. In fact, she rejected my feelings pretty hard. To avoid me, she started pulling away, got engaged to someone else. Even when I was in danger, she didn't care anymore. I was hospitalized after a car accident, and she didn't come to see me even once. So eventually, I gave up on liking her, but later, I realized she didn't actually hate my feelings. She was just scared to face them, because she liked me too. She just couldn't admit it. My voice grew distant as I spoke, and I could feel Elio's silence grow heavy. When he heard my last sentence, his breath caught. He asked softly, "Do you still like her?" I shook my head, then remembered he couldn't see, and lowered my voice to say, "It's all in the past now. I don't want to like her anymore." Elio nodded. "Exactly, that's how it should be." I couldn't see his face, but just from his voice, I could tell he was full of righteous anger on my behalf. He added excitedly, "Jeremy, I heard there are a ton of beautiful girls in the drama club. Let's go meet someone new tomorrow, make her regret it." I couldn't help but chuckle. I didn't refute him. Instead, I played along and said, "All right, tomorrow it is, but it's late now, and we've got an early class. Let's sleep." The room fell quiet, and I soon drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I was woken by my alarm. I got up and shook Elio awake before heading down to wash up quickly. Once he was ready, we left the dorm together. As we stepped outside, I didn't see Elizabeth. I figured she must have left already. I didn't dwell on it. I gave the area a quick glance, saw she wasn't there, and withdrew my gaze. I only hoped that this time, she wouldn't come back to disturb my life again. Our first class was self-study, no teacher. Since we hadn't slept well the night before, Elio and I both dozed off at our desks. By the end of class, we'd gotten enough rest and were feeling much more awake. We had no classes for the rest of the morning, and since we'd promised to check out the drama club, we grabbed breakfast and headed to their booth. It was early in the semester, and all the clubs were recruiting members. A whole section of campus had been set aside just for club booths. As new students walked by, the upperclassmen at each booth enthusiastically called out, "Basketball club recruiting. Hey bro, wanna check us out? Anime club sign-ups. Check out our figure collection and brand new cosplay costumes. Join us and you could get your own. Drama club. Anyone? Tons of handsome guys and gorgeous girls. Want to join the student union? It's a great way to grow and earn extra credits." Elio and I had already made up our minds. We walked straight to the drama club booth and signed our names on the registration sheet. The upperclassman in charge of the booth saw 2 new recruits at once and beamed with delight. She said, "Wow, you two are really good looking. You've definitely made the right choice with the drama club." Elio pulled me closer and glanced around at the other club members. Every single one of them was attractive enough to make heads turn. Grinning, he leaned toward the upperclassman and asked cheekily, "Senior, are all drama club members this good looking? And more importantly, are they single?" She lifted her chin proudly, patted her chest, and declared, "Of course we're good looking, but as for dating, that's up to fate." Elio nodded knowingly. He could hear what she was really saying. We're hard to get, but he didn't seem to mind. Beautiful people are worth the effort, after all. Chapter 18. A week later, after Elio and I finished our last class of the afternoon, we were on our way back to the dorm when a message popped up in the club group chat. It said that the recruitment season was officially over, and to welcome the new members, there would be a dinner gathering that evening. The dinner was set near campus, and since quite a few people were attending, they had booked a private room. Elio and I arrived neither early nor late. When we stepped into the room, a portion of the group was already there. I immediately spotted the senior who had been in charge of recruitment and went up to greet her. "Hi, Senior Sue." Cecilia seemed to remember Elio and me fairly well. She smiled as we walked in and started introducing us. She said, "My name is Cecilia. I'm the president of the drama club. This is our vice president, Lillian. Just a heads up, she's single." That last part was clearly directed at Elio. It was obvious that Cecilia still remembered how Elio had asked during recruitment whether it was okay to date the pretty girls in the club. But Elio glanced at the direction of Lillian's gaze and a mischievous smile crept onto his face. He reached out his hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Senior. I'm Elio. And this is Jeremy." She gave a polite nod and briefly shook hands with Elio. Then her gaze landed back on me. This time, even Elio noticed it. A faint blush crept up my face, and I also reached out my hand, greeting her. "Nice to meet you, Senior." With a soft smile, she replied, "Nice to meet you too. If you don't mind, you can call me Lily." Her sudden friendliness caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to respond, but thankfully Elio stepped in and eased the awkwardness. He asked, then, "Senior, can I call you Lily too?" Lillian gave a small cough, and the tips of her ears gradually turned red. She didn't answer his question, but at least the moment had passed without tension. 10 minutes later, everyone had arrived. After we were all seated around the table, someone noticed there was an extra chair. Just as people were wondering about it, Cecilia stood up, cleared her throat, and said with mock mystery, "We have a special guest tonight. From today on, she will be the investor behind our club and will be fully funding our activities, tonight's dinner included." Cheers erupted around the table, except from me. I don't know why, but I had a strange feeling that I knew who this special guest was, and when Elizabeth walked in, dressed in a white dress, my suspicion was confirmed. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Chapter 19. Elizabeth entered the private room, instinctively wanting to walk in my direction, but everyone else had already taken their seats. The only empty chair left was at the head of the table, and both seats beside me were already occupied. She recognized both of the people sitting next to me. One was my roommate, the other was the president of the drama club. Her emotions were complicated. She considered asking Lillian to swap seats, but couldn't think of a reason. She looked at me, hoping I would make the suggestion instead, but after giving her a glance when she entered, I hadn't looked her way again. After a brief pause, she reluctantly sat in the seat that had clearly been reserved for her. Even though it was just a brief moment, Lillian keenly noticed Elizabeth's gaze. She poured me a glass of juice and, using the motion of handing it over to lean in slightly, asked in a low voice, "Do you know our new investor?" I replied, "No, I don't," I answered firmly, without hesitation. It was clear that Lillian didn't believe me, but since I didn't want to talk about it, she didn't push further. With everyone present, we went around the table introducing ourselves while waiting for the food. Once the intros were done, the dishes began arriving. Lillian was incredibly attentive. She kept an eye on my needs, serving me food and refilling my juice, even though I repeatedly told her she didn't have to. The veteran club members weren't used to seeing Lillian act so sweet. They couldn't help teasing her about it. Elio even stepped in to intercept her a few times on purpose, but she just gently served him another portion as if nothing had happened. Her thoughtful nature almost had me fooled into thinking she was always like that. But when another guy came over, trying to strike up a conversation while holding a drink, she responded with a polite yet distant attitude, nothing like the warm tone she had when speaking to me. That's when it hit me. This gentle side of her was something she reserved especially for me. Elio remarked, "Wow, looks like I'm enjoying some of your perks too." He had clearly noticed Lillian's attitude as well. He leaned in a little, and although he lowered his voice, the implication behind his words was crystal clear. I was busy handling Elio's teasing and Lillian's attentiveness, so I didn't notice that Elizabeth had been quietly watching me the whole time. Elio noticed, but he didn't say anything, just rolled his eyes. Lillian noticed too. Her smile became even softer, almost as if to shield me completely from Elizabeth's gaze. But what hurt Elizabeth the most was that I didn't push Lillian away. It was as if she were punishing herself, continuing to watch the whole dinner unfold. And when Cecilia suggested we all head to a karaoke bar afterward, Elizabeth came along as well. At the KTV, Elizabeth was once again a step too late and missed the chance to sit next to me. In the end, she found herself alone in a corner, watching me laugh and chat with others. Soon, it was my turn to sing. I had picked a love song. I picked up the mic, focused, and started singing along to the melody. As soon as I opened my mouth, Elio couldn't hold back and exclaimed, "Jeremy, just how many surprises are you hiding from me?" I couldn't help but smile at his comment. The very next moment, a soft and clear voice joined mine, harmonizing perfectly. I turned my head in surprise, and saw Lillian's gentle, smiling face. Chapter 20. From the corner of the room, Elizabeth watched the smile on Jeremy's face, and for a moment, it stung. The subtle connection between him and Lillian, the unspoken understanding, was like a thorn stuck in her throat. She thought back carefully and suddenly realized it had been a long time since Jeremy had smiled like that around her. Ever since she discovered his hidden feelings when he was 16, she had gone from shock to anger. Without hesitation, she shattered that final layer of illusion, trying to force him to give up on what she saw as a forbidden love. But Jeremy, unexpectedly, had been stubborn. He refused to let go. From then on, every time he approached her, he did so with extreme caution, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing, terrified of upsetting her. She wouldn't let him stay close, and even when he did, her expression was always cold. Elizabeth thought that by doing so, she could kill his feelings, but instead, he persisted, for 2 whole years, and during those 2 years, she had never seen him truly smile again. Now, she had finally succeeded in driving him away. He was moving on, to someone else, and she regretted it. After the song ended, the atmosphere between Lillian and me felt more relaxed. It was no longer as awkward as it had been during dinner. A senior girl asked, "Hey, Junior, can I get your contact info?" I turned around and saw it was another senior member of the drama club. I didn't refuse. After all, we were in the same club. Sharing contacts would make communication easier. The gathering wrapped up around 9 p.m. Before leaving, I went to the restroom. When I came out, I saw Elizabeth waiting outside. I paused for a moment, but I had no intention of catching up with her. I stepped forward, intending to walk past her, but she reached out and grabbed my wrist. She said, "Jeremy, I regret it." Left with no choice, I turned around and looked at her. I pulled my hand free from her grasp, and the look in my eyes was nothing like the joy she had hoped for. I asked, "So what?" Elizabeth struggled to swallow the sour ache in her heart. She explained, "Jeremy, I've called off the engagement with Pablo. Back then, I was scared. I thought our feelings were wrong, that they would never be accepted. So I forced myself to accept someone else and pushed you away, trying to make you give up on your love for me. I thought that would make everything return to normal, but I was wrong." As she spoke, her eyes reddened with tears. She continued, "I once told you that you should love someone your own age, not me. But now I've realized I couldn't even wait for you to fall for someone else. The moment you pulled away, the moment another girl appeared by your side, it already felt like I couldn't breathe. Jeremy, the truth is, the one I love is you, and I can't just stand by and watch you fall for someone else. Jeremy, can you give me another chance?" Elizabeth rarely cried. In my memory, the first time I saw her cry was when I had just arrived at the Moo household. She hadn't been so attentive to me in the beginning. She didn't know how to raise a child, and had just taken over the company, so she barely had time to care for me. Because I was living under someone else's roof, I was too timid to speak up, even when I caught a cold and ran a high fever. That night, I collapsed in front of her, my body burning with heat. It wasn't until she got close that she noticed something was wrong, and she rushed me to the hospital. The doctor said if we had been even a little later, I could have ended up brain damaged, or worse, dead. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was Elizabeth's face, filled with guilt, her eyes red from crying. From that day on, no matter how busy she was, she always made time for me. She gave me everything she could, showered me with love, just to prove that the Moo family was now my home, and that she would be my safe harbor, forever. But promises, in the end, are just words. Chapter 21. And now, she was crying again, right in front of me, her voice choked with emotion, begging me to give her another chance. I looked at her and let out a long sigh. I said, "Elizabeth." Hearing her name, she lifted her head. Her eyes were full of pleading and hope, but mine held only confusion. I asked, "If you loved me, then why, knowing I have a sensitive stomach, did you still force me to eat those spicy dishes I couldn't handle, just because Pablo said something? Why, when Pablo and I got into that car accident, did you choose to save him instead of me? You didn't even come to see me afterward, not even once. Do you know what happened right before that crash? He called me delusional, said I had some sick crush on my sister-in-law, said my feelings for you were disgusting and shameless. And Elizabeth, you chose him." With just those two questions, I watched the hope in her eyes shatter bit by bit. She had no answer, because not even the present-day Elizabeth truly understood what was going through her mind back then when she made those choices. Even if her goal had been to make me give up, there had been 1,000 other ways, none of which needed to hurt me like that. Seeing her fall silent, I let out a cold laugh. "See, even you can't explain it. Elizabeth, do you really love me, or are you just used to having me around, used to being the only one in my eyes? And now that I've let go, now that I've moved on, you just don't know how to deal with it?" Elizabeth shook her head. "No, Jeremy, I really love you." She tried to explain in a panic, but before the words had even fully left her mouth, I had already turned and walked away. I was still close enough to hear her, but my steps didn't slow for a second. A few steps later, I saw Lillian. Her eyes shifted past me and landed on Elizabeth behind me, but only for a second. Then she looked back at me. She asked, "Need help?" I knew exactly what she meant. I shook my head and said, "Don't worry about her. Let's just head back." The moment I said, "Let's," Lillian couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. She nodded and replied, "Okay, I'll walk back with you." I didn't refuse. When we returned to the karaoke room, only Elio was left. Seeing us come back, he picked up Lily's bag and walked over. He said, "Let's go." The three of us walked away, farther and farther. No one looked back. Only Elizabeth remained where she stood, watching us disappear into the distance. She could have caught up, just a few quick steps and she'd be beside us. But somehow, that distance felt impossibly far. So far, that even if she spent a lifetime chasing, she'd never be able to reach it again. Back at the dorm, Elio, always good at reading the room, headed upstairs first, leaving me and Lillian the space to ourselves. I didn't even have time to stop him. I gave Lillian a helpless shrug and said, "Sorry, that's just how Elio is, always kind of impulsive." But Lillian shook her head and replied, "No, he's very thoughtful." I didn't know how to respond to that. Before I could say anything else, she smiled and asked, "Can I call you Jeremy?" I nodded, and only then did she continue, "Jeremy, can we be friends?" I wasn't expecting that. I froze for a second, then smiled. I said, "I thought we already were, the moment you called me Jeremy." Understanding the implication behind my words, Lillian smiled, a little embarrassed. That was slow of me, she admitted, twirling a strand of her hair. Then she added, well then, let's exchange contacts. We were so caught up talking earlier, I didn't get the chance. I nodded. Instinctively, I reached for my phone, only to find nothing in my pocket. It hit me then. I'd left my phone in the dorm. I had completely forgotten to bring it out with me. Chapter 22. Just then, Elio came rushing down the stairs, panting and out of breath. He placed my phone in my hand with a kind of ceremonial reverence, then turned around and jogged back upstairs like a man who had completed a grand mission. I couldn't help but laugh at his retreating figure. After exchanging contact info with Lillian, I waved to him and said, Senior, it's getting late. I'll head up first, you should head back soon too. Lillian nodded, and only then did I start up the stairs. But just as I reached the corner landing, I saw 3 very familiar figures awkwardly crouched there, peeking down the stairwell. 4-person dorm, everyone but me was gathered right here. I sighed, helplessly. What are you guys doing? They looked a bit embarrassed to see me come up so quickly, their eyes darting around, trying to cover for themselves. They said, wow, this staircase sure is a staircase. And the moon tonight, it's just so moon-like. Elio, at least, stayed composed. Man, I just ran too fast, needed to catch my breath. The other 2 gave him a look that screamed, seriously. Meanwhile, in an apartment near South City University, Elizabeth sat slumped on the carpet beside her bed. Empty liquor bottles were scattered around her. Her cheeks were flushed, clearly, she was already drunk. Still, she kept mechanically pouring and drinking, over and over. Eventually, even pouring felt like too much effort. She grabbed the bottle and started drinking straight from it. Beside her, her phone kept lighting up and going dark, ringing non-stop. Finally annoyed by the endless buzzing, she reached for it, but her blurred vision doubled everything in front of her. After fumbling several times, she still couldn't grab it. Frustrated, she swiped at it hard. Bang! The phone flew across the room. The ringing stopped abruptly, and silence returned. Only then did the restlessness in her chest begin to quiet down. She picked up the bottle again and took a swig, only to get nothing. She pulled it away and gave it a shake. Out again, she muttered to herself. Then she let her body fall sideways, landing right on top of the pile of bottles. They were cold, and they dug painfully into her back. She winced as 1 or 2 propped-up bottles jabbed her ribs. Annoyed, she flung them aside with another careless sweep and laid back down. It was still uncomfortable, but nowhere near as painful as what she felt inside. She whispered, Jeremy, I was wrong. Please forgive me, she kept murmuring, but her consciousness was already slipping. Finally, she fell into a heavy sleep. Elizabeth had a dream. In the dream, Jeremy confessed to her when he was 16. Instead of reacting with shock and fury, she gently told him that he was still too young, that he couldn't yet understand the weight of the feelings he carried. So they made a promise. They would spend 2 years apart, and if, after 2 years, he still loved her, they would be together. During those 2 years, they didn't live under the same roof, but they stayed in touch, just like regular friends. There were no age gaps, no complicated roles, no forbidden labels. When Jeremy got bullied, she didn't show up in person, but she made sure someone was there to protect him. Then came his 18th birthday. Jeremy confessed again. He said, Elizabeth, I've thought it through. I'm not afraid of the consequences. I still love you so much. Can we be together? And this time, she said yes. Together, they faced the whispers, the stares, the rumors. Hand in hand, they walked into a future that belonged only to them. It was beautiful, unreal, too perfect to exist. She saw herself in a wedding dress, her face glowing with joy, running happily toward Jeremy, who caught her in his arms. He said, Elizabeth, I finally get to marry you. Chapter 23. The dream had been so beautiful that when Elizabeth opened her eyes to the white walls of a hospital room and saw Mother Moo sitting beside her bed, there was still an undeniable sense of loss in her gaze. Seeing that Elizabeth was finally awake, Mother Moo could finally breathe a sigh of relief. She said, What were you thinking? Locking yourself up and drinking yourself half to death so far from home? Do you have any idea how worried your father and I were when we couldn't reach you? As she spoke, her eyes began to shimmer with tears. I only have one daughter. Do you know what it felt like to open that door and find you unconscious, unresponsive, no matter how loud I shouted? Do you know how scared I was when the doctor told me you had severe gastric bleeding, and if we'd brought you in any later, it could have been life-threatening? Elizabeth, even if you don't care about yourself, can't you at least care about me? Elizabeth remained silent for a long time before finally whispering, I'm sorry. Mother Moo continued, Come home with us, Elizabeth. If you don't want to marry Pablo, then don't. Just stop hurting yourself like this, okay? Elizabeth opened her mouth, as if to say something else, but in the end, all she could do was give a weak nod. What was the point of staying here anymore? Jeremy would never forgive her. Elizabeth lay in bed, drained of strength, staring at the 4 drip as the last drops slowly trickled down. The doctor had told her mother that her condition had stabilized, and once the drip was done, they could begin the transfer procedures. After leaving Penang this time, it might be a very long time before she ever returned. She wondered if Jeremy, upon hearing the news, would be glad. She wouldn't bother him anymore. I didn't find out about what happened to Elizabeth until much later, after she'd already been transferred back to the capital. That night, after the dinner gathering, she had returned home alone, gotten drunk, and ended up hospitalized with gastric bleeding. When I heard the news, I froze. Looking at the message Lynn, her assistant, had sent me, I stayed silent for a long time before finally replying. "Is she okay now?" The assistant responded. "She's out of danger. She just needs plenty of rest." Seeing those words finally put me at ease, I replied, "Please remind her to rest and take care of herself." When I saw the assistant respond with a short, "Understood, Jeremy," I didn't reply again. From that day on, I never received another update about Elizabeth. A year later, it was once again time for new student orientation in the summer. That night, just as I put my phone down and was about to sleep, it buzzed again. I picked it up. It was a message from Lillian. She wrote, "At the end of the month, the school's holding a welcome party. Every club is going to put on a performance. The drama club too. Want to sign up?" I replied, "Is it a stage play? I've never acted in a proper one. During past shows, I only helped behind the scenes or filled in tiny roles. I'm not sure I'd be good enough." I didn't immediately agree to her invitation, even though I'd been in the drama club for a year, and I'd technically been in a few performances. My actual acting experience was still nearly zero. But Lillian replied quickly. She said, "Most of our members had never done any acting when they joined. We all started from scratch. It's okay, I'll be there with you, and we'll be holding auditions. Just give it a try. If it doesn't work out, it'll still be good experience for the future." Reading that last part, I finally made up my mind. I responded, "All right, Elio and I will give it a shot." Lillian was clearly in a great mood after getting the answer she wanted. We chatted for a bit longer, and when it got late, we wished each other good night. I gently knocked on the edge of Elio's bed. "Elio, are you awake?" He mumbled. "What's up?" Half asleep, he squinted at me, clearly confused about why I was waking him up in the middle of the night. Grinning, I said, "Lillian told me there's a welcome party at the end of the month. The drama club's doing a performance. Want to try out with me?" Elio blinked, checked the time on his phone, and went quiet for a second. Then he groaned. "That's what this is about. Couldn't it wait till morning? It's 1 a.m. He gave me a look full of sleepy resentment. I felt a little guilty, but still asked, "So, are you in?" He muttered, Yeah, I'm in. Can I sleep now?" His voice was filled with resignation, but in the end, he still said yes. Chapter 24. I finally let Elio off the hook, and that night, I slept like a baby. The next day, after our classes, the two of us headed to the drama club to sign up. When we arrived, the play had just been decided. It was a classic, a scene from Snow White. Originally, I only intended to audition for a supporting role with a decent amount of lines, but Elio grabbed the pen and, without hesitation, wrote my name down under Prince. Then, under the list of 7 dwarfs, he put his own. He said, "Since we've decided to level up, this time you play the prince, and I'll be a dwarf." He looked beyond excited, his eyes practically glowing. Then he pulled me up to Cecilia and eagerly asked, "Senior, is Lillian signing up too?" Cecilia exchanged a glance with Elio. She looked down at the sign-up sheet where Jeremy was now boldly written in the male lead column, and then she simply wrote Lillian under the female lead. "She's in," she said, just like that. Lillian and I were very clearly arranged as the leads. No discussion, no negotiation. The two of us stood at the back, exchanging a wordless look, but Lillian looked at Jeremy and thought to herself, this isn't so bad. She'd suggested he audition in the first place just so they'd have more time together. Now that they were cast as the leads, she had even more reason to be around him. Since it was the beginning of the month, and the welcome party wouldn't be until the end, we still had about 4 weeks, plenty of time. Most of Snow White's key scenes were in the first half, and the audition scenes were also taken from that section. Ironically, in the actual script, the prince has the fewest interactions with Snow White, but despite that, Lillian still chose to rehearse with me the entire time. And honestly, as a total newbie in theater, having someone experienced like her helping out was a huge advantage. I avoided a lot of rookie mistakes, and her guidance helped me improve fast. After almost a week of rehearsals, the official cast list was finalized. Not much had changed, just the usual swaps and eliminations among popular roles. Lillian and I were firmly locked in as the leads. Elio's role, however, had changed, from a dwarf to the evil queen. That was my idea. After all, we had both agreed to level up. I couldn't be the only one taking it seriously. Elio had groaned endlessly about it, but ultimately gave in the day before registration closed. He let me cross out his name from the dwarves list and write it under Evil Queen. He picked a role for me, and I picked one for him. Totally fair. Once casting was confirmed, the next step was to sort out costumes. Technically, Cecilia was in charge of that, but right now, it was Lillian standing in front of me, holding a notebook and asking for my measurements. I looked at her, puzzled. Isn't this part of Senior Sue's responsibility? Why are you handling it too? Lillian gave a small cough, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. She's the president, and there's a lot on her plate. Since I've been spending more time rehearsing with you guys, she figured it'd be easier for me to handle this part too. I nodded, took the notebook from her, and wrote down mine and Elio's measurements. Usually, for school productions, it's enough to rent costumes that roughly fit. There's no need for custom tailoring every time, but thanks to the generous support from the Moo Group, the next 4 years I'd spend at South City University would be the wealthiest years the drama club had ever seen. Cecilia was already a senior this year. Technically, she should have started picking her successor last year, or even handed the position over to Lillian, the vice president, but she just couldn't let go. After all, how often does a club get to go to war with unlimited ammo? Not just the drama club, no other club on campus had ever seen a sponsor this extravagant. No budgets, no expectations, no limits. Chapter 25. It was obvious to everyone that the Moo Group was being this generous because of me, though I never admitted it. Whenever someone asked about my relationship with Elizabeth, I would simply reply, just an elder from the family. 2 weeks before the welcome gala, Cecilia told me she planned to recommend me as the new president of the drama club. I was a bit stunned. Sure, I'd known there would be a leadership change this year. Cecilia was a senior now, and by her final semester, she probably wouldn't stay on campus much. Even if she did, her focus would shift to academics and internships. What I didn't understand was, why me? I asked, wouldn't Lillian be more suitable? I voiced the question honestly, because I genuinely thought so. Cecilia chuckled. You two really are in sync. When I asked her, she recommended you, and now I come to you, and you bring her up. But on this, I agree with Lillian. She and the others are in their 3rd year. Come next year, they'll be busy preparing for graduation. If she took over now only to hand it off again next year, it'd be too rushed. You're just the right fit. Plus, let's be honest, everyone knows Moo Group is sponsoring us because of you. With you in charge, no one will object. Truthfully, the moment she mentioned Moo Group as a reason, I had intended to decline, but in the end, Cecilia convinced me. If I had no plans to completely sever ties with the Moo family, then there was no shame in accepting support that was already mine by default. Since I still called Elizabeth a family elder, then there was nothing wrong in accepting the help that came with that title. So I agreed, but for now, my main priority was the welcome gala, just 2 weeks away. It would be my first time performing on stage as the male lead. To say I wasn't nervous would have been a lie. I'd grown much closer to Lillian, too, over the rehearsals. Soon, the night of the gala arrived. Dressed in a white prince's costume and stage makeup, I stepped onto the stage. In the audience, sitting toward the back, Elizabeth watched, her eyes filled with a quiet sense of longing. The invitation had been sent by Cecilia on behalf of the drama club to Moo Group. It wasn't Elizabeth's first time watching one of our shows. In fact, she'd been there for every performance I'd ever been in, but always backstage, always silently. That way, she could see me, clearly, but never disturb me. This time, I was the lead, and for once, she wanted to be a real member of the audience. So she found a quiet seat, tucked away from the crowd. Her thoughts wandered, and when she came back to herself, the play had already moved on. The evil queen had tricked Snow White into eating the poisoned apple. Snow White lay unconscious. The dwarves were heartbroken. That was when the prince rode in on his white horse, saw Snow White surrounded by the sorrowful dwarves, and pulled out the wishing stone to awaken her. Narration followed. The princess followed the prince to a beautiful kingdom, and from then on, they lived happily ever after. The play was a success. Just before the curtain fell, each dwarf came forward, handing the prince a small bouquet of flowers. By the time he held them all, it had become a giant bouquet. Nervousness, rare and visible, flickered across Jeremy's face. He walked up to Lillian and handed her the bouquet. He asked. Snow White followed the prince to become his bride. So, Lillian, will you be my girlfriend? The unexpected confession set the entire room ablaze. A wave of cheers and teasing erupted from the audience. Say yes, say yes. On stage, the dwarves began dancing in circles around Lillian and me, and just before the curtain closed completely, her voice came through the mic, clear and steady. I will. In the audience, several rows away, Elizabeth gazed at the falling curtain that slowly obscured their figures from view. In that final moment, she could have sworn Jeremy looked her way, so close, and yet, so far out of reach.